Hello, everyone. It's Larry Kotlikoff back with Economics Matters, the podcast. I'm delighted today to have David Blanchette. He's the managing director and head of retirement research for PGIM DC Solutions. Now, what is that? That's the global investment management business of Prudential Financial, Inc. We're all familiar with Prudential. It's a huge company. David has a PhD, a CFA, and a CFP. And let me just read a little bit of his bio. First of all, in his job, he develops research and innovative solutions to help improve retirement outcomes for investors. So he's into financial advice, planning. He'll tell us more. Prior to joining PGIM, he was the head of retirement research for Morningstar Investment Management. And before that, he was the director of consulting investment research for the retirement plan consulting group at Unified Trust Company. So he's worked for some major companies. He's published over 100 papers in a variety of industry and academic journals. He's writing for the Wall Street Journal, Advisor's Perspective, ThinkAdvisor. So he's really in the mainstream of, he's really a big star in this field of financial analysis and advice. And he's gotten awards from the Academy of Financial Services, the CFP Board, the Financial Analysts Journal, the Financial Planning Association. He's got too many awards here to really, Journal Financial Planning, Journal Financial Services, my God, Retirement Management Journal. I wish I could get one of these awards. Maybe you could sell me one of yours. Anyway, he's currently an adjunct professor of wealth management at the American College of Financial Services, research fellow of the Alliance for Lifetime Income, formerly a member of the executive committee for the Defined Contribution Institutional Investment Association and the ERISA Advisory Council. ERISA is a major institution in Washington, employee research. What is ERISA? Oh, no, this is ERISA. This is This is the government. Sorry, I was getting this mixed up with the EBRI. ERISA is the law that was passed, what was in 74, to regulate the defined benefit pension industry. And so he's got all these awards and accolades from different media outlets and associations. He holds a degree in finance and economics from the University of Kentucky, a master's degree in financial services from the American College of Financial Services, a master's degree in business administration from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and a doctorate in personal financial planning from Texas Tech University. So, geez, you are Mr. Degree, and you look like you're 25. So something's not quite right, doesn't quite square here. When David isn't working, he's probably out on a jog playing with his 4 kids or rooting for the Kentucky Wildcats, because David was born and bred in Kentucky, and he now actually lives in Kentucky. I just found out, in Lexington, Kentucky, and he's commuting, I guess, to Prudential's headquarters in New Jersey and around the country all the time. So we're going to have a great conversation here, David. Great to have you. Maybe you want to just tell people how we know where you're born. How did you end up on your career path? What took you down this path?
Sure. So, I've always been fascinated by financial planning, financial advising. When I was in high school, I was just drawn to this notion of helping people make better choices. So for the last, 20 plus years, that's kind of all I've been doing. When I first got started, I actually was selling life insurance for a few years. I became a financial advisor. And I would say that my role has changed now, where I'm working within PGIM and Prudential on issues around helping people accomplish their goals, but it's all kind of been the same thing, right? It's helping people figure out, how much to save, how much they can spend, how to invest, things like that. So now I would say I'm more of a financial planning academic than I used to be more of a practitioner, but to me, it's the same. It's just helping people kind of realize their financial goals.
Cool. So we decided ahead of starting this that maybe we would discuss the difference between economics-based financial planning and conventional financial planning, at least for a while. And then I have some other kind of questions about people's behavior, which is a big question mark, I think, in my mind and other people's mind, why so many people just do not get their act together. I mean, there was I think a study released, I'm not sure who came out with this, just maybe it was a couple of days ago or yesterday, said that retirement, the typical or the average retirement account was something like $125,000 of people coming into retirement. The median was about $25,000. So we're talking about people, the vast majority of Americans coming into retirement with no wealth. And the median spending in the country is around $160,000. So you can't even afford basically 1 year. Most people can't afford 1 year of median household spending in America. So this is beyond a crisis. This is a description of complete kind of failure. This retirement account system, tax financed, that we set up decades ago to encourage people to save, the Roth, the IRAs, the 401ks, the 403bs, the SEPs. We have all these different plans. Let me just since we're on this for a second, is this an admission really, or proof that the whole thing has failed, that we need to more or less compel people to save because they won't do it on their own?
So, I think that defined contribution plans, which we could kind of lump together as 401ks and 403bs, like they've been moderately effective. If you look at individuals who aren't covered by a retirement plan at their employer, and those that are, people that have DC plans do much better than those that don't. I think, to your point, if you look at other countries that do have much higher required savings rates, you see significantly higher balances at retirement. So there is part of me that kind of acknowledges that even if you have intelligent defaults, that people aren't going to save enough, right? And so I'm not opposed to having like a mandatory contribution level in DC plans. I just don't know that we have the political will as a country to actually do that. So I'd like to see significant increases in the default savings rates in 401k plans, right? When the PPA was passed back in 2006, there was 3%. 3% doesn't get you anywhere for retirement. If we increase those to say 10 or 12%, we might see better behaviors, but even a lot of folks can opt out or access their savings. So I'm positive on the DC industry, but I do think we can do things that would definitely improve savings rates.
Well, it certainly works for a lot of people like us. I mean, no question. But the ones who aren't contributing or not contributing enough,
right?
That's unfortunately it's not working out. So I think so I have a pet proposal for how to fix Social Security, which would involve shutting down the old system, paying off accrued benefits, and forcing everybody to contribute into basically a personalized account where all the money is jointly invested, not by Wall Street, but by my laptop. And everybody's getting the same return, and there's progressivity, and the money comes out as an inflation adjusted annuity that's cohort specific. But I'm not going to take us through that. But I'm with you that we have to get to compulsory saving, because we're just not disciplined enough for whatever reason it is. And of course, it could be that people have assets in other places. They haven't accumulated this way, but they put money into the restaurant that they started, or some real estate that they're renting out. So we can't necessarily make too much of such a low level of retirement accounts on average. We have to look at kind of the overall picture, distribution of adequacy of retirement preparation. But let's just talk for a bit about, and then we'll come back maybe to this question of behavior. Why, for the ones who aren't actually doing it, what's going on? So we'll come back to that kind of behavioral finance question. But economics versus conventional financial planning. David encouraged me to raise this question with him. I have this financial planning software, Maxify.com, which does economics-based planning. I don't want to be always hawking it in these podcasts, so that's why I wasn't necessarily going to bring it up right off, at least. But Dave wants to chat about it. So great. I'm always delighted to talk about it. So the economics approach goes back like 100 years to work by Irving Fisher. He was the top dog economist at Yale. He was at Yale in the 1920s. He did just fundamental work in all kinds of things. The reason we know the relationship between nominal interest rates and inflation, it's called the Fisher's rule. You've probably seen that. So he also developed the first kind of model of lifetime, what's called consumption smoothing, where you're basically, it's the model of a squirrel. The squirrel is going to be young, the squirrel is going to be old, the squirrel is going to be retired in the nest when they're old. They're going to accumulate acorns, eat some when they're young, but the rest are going to save. And the idea is to have basically the same number of acorns to eat when you're young and you're old. That's consumption smoothing. And it comes from satiation, that if the squirrel ate all the acorns when he was young, he'd be stuffed. When he's old, he'd be starving. That the downside of having too few acorns when you're old is much worse than the upside of having more acorns when you're young. And that's what's leading physiologically to our wanting to save and not consume not eat 20 steaks in one day. So economics says very simply, just collect information about people's resources, which all the financial planning programs do, but don't ask them what they want to do. Because what they like to do, if I asked you what your desired target is, if you ask me, I'd say it's $1 billion a day. That's what I'd like to spend in retirement. And please make it happen, financial planner or financial software. But economics says, and our software says, tell us what you got. We're going to tell you how to allocate that so that you can have the same number of acorns to eat every year for the rest of your life. In other words, we'll figure out your sustainable spending so that the living standard per household member stays the same. Obviously, the household, if there's more mouths to feed, you have to have more acorns to keep everybody's acorn per person fixed, if you like, taking account, a joint economy, economies and shared living. So that, in a nutshell, it's basically, let's figure out a smooth living standard path, and then let's figure out ways to raise it by maximizing Social Security benefits, lowering taxes, playing with retirement accounts, Roth withdrawals, and so forth, to get the benefits up, the taxes down, the spending up, and or you could work longer, see what that pays off in terms of higher spending, retire in Texas where there's no state income tax, downsize your home. All the kinds of different things that you clearly are involved in thinking about too. So that's economics-based planning. Maybe you want to explain conventional planning, and then we can have a little back and forth about, I can criticize it a bit and you can criticize maybe economics-based planning.
Well, I think what you described is how a lot of financial planning tools work, right? There's this notion that you can either give them a goal or you can solve for a goal. And there's this idea that, I want to spend $100,000 a year in retirement and all that. I guess for me, what I'm more interested in is kind of like, at least right now, is like the way that we define outcomes and the way that we actually do the modeling. So, for example, like the most common outcomes metric in most financial planning tools today is the probability of success, right? And what that is, for those of you that are listening to know what it is, you look at a given goal, and then if you accomplish the goal in its entirety, you're effectively assigned a value of 1 for that particular trial. So these are simulations where there's uncertain returns. And so you might do 1,000 different trials or 1,000 different hypothetical retirements. And so what happens then is you do that 1,000 times, and you look at each individual trial or like fake retirement, and you figure out what percentage of those you accomplish your goal, right? A huge problem with that, though, is that it assumes that if you fall $1 short in the 30th year of retirement, like that's the same outcome as falling $1 short in the first year of retirement, and then having no more income. So what concerns me is that when you use, I would call it like a binary outcomes metric, so ones and zeros, right? Either you do or you don't accurately capture how individuals feel about like a different continuum of outcomes, right? So one, like the outcomes metric that I think is very predominant in our industry can lead to information or results that are not very good, but also a lot of tools assume that the goal itself is static, or I have to spend a certain amount every year. And when you incorporate the fact that individuals can cut back on spending if they need to, and the penalty or the cost or the disutility of doing so varies based upon the type of consumption, that also leads to different outcomes. So I think that, what I'm I don't know that I'm advocating for us to change kind of like how it works in general versus kind of the ways that a lot of advisors think about, what it means to spend and consume in retirement, as well as the outcomes metrics we use to quantify outcomes.
So you're on the same wavelength as me. You have all these degrees. They're not in economics, but ultimately they're in economics, really, because all the stuff that you studied and working on, it's all economics. So and kind of economics is basically fundamental common sense. It's the square. And when we do Monte Carlo simulations in our, there's economics says, there's two ways to do financial planning to handle risk. One is to use very conservative assumptions. That's called a certainty equivalent. I'm going to act as if things are for sure. I'm going to plan as if things are for sure, but what I'm going to assume is going to be very conservative to take into account the risk. And that's actually fundamentally underlying asset pricing. When we price a stock and it's got this very, high average dividend payout, but we discount it because of the risk. We do a risk adjustment to make the value of it smaller. That's really kind of certainty equivalent analysis. So that's one branch of finance, but the other branch is just to say, do Monte Carlo simulations and just see what's going to happen to somebody's living standard through time as they get high returns and low returns. And you can assume a spending behavior as they go along. And that's what we do. We show living standard trajectories when we ask people to run our Monte Carlo and tell us about what investment strategies they have and what they want to compare with. We say, okay, we're going to run Monte Carlo simulations of your living standard outcome, where every year you will adjust. We're not going to calculate the probability. Assume that you're going to stick to some target that you're setting, out of the blue without any reference really to your resources, what you can really afford, and that you're going to stick to that right up till you go bankrupt, or you may, succeed in dying, or you may actually just have the target low enough so that you can spend, not go broke and spend at that level, or or you can just be lucky with your returns. But the idea that one would actually plan that way, I'm very uncomfortable with that, because it's really, judging a plan that has an 80% probability of succeeding means there's a 20% probability of failing, and that means you're bankrupt. And as you make the risk higher in the portfolio, that probability of succeeding goes up, the probability of failing goes down. But I think what you were just saying, what I was hearing, is that the probability of failing earlier goes up as well, which means you're bankrupt for longer. You're eating no acorns for many more years. And that is something that I don't think most financial planners using this methodology, this conventional methodology, really understand, that there's more than just success and failure. There's also the timing of when the failure would hit. And that's almost exactly what you were referencing, I think, if I read you right. So this adjustment, but the other thing about the adjustment is that the adjustment has to be made in the context of not living with some planned spending, adjusting that maybe uniformly up or down, but adjusting all the taxes that are associated with spending more or less in the future, and having more asset income because you've done well in the market. All that has to happen instantly and internally consistently, so that the Monte Carlo trajectories of your living standard are actually, valid. They're not kind of based, half of it's right, but half of it's wrong. Anyway, that's where we, and then there's another method of Monte Carlo analysis of investment analysis we do in our software, which is called upside investment. What I was just telling you about was full risk investment, which is you take upside and downside risk, but you try and spend cautiously, invest, in a diversified way, and you get to see all the trajectory outcomes. But the other way would be you invest just in tips, except for some money that you put in the stock market. But that money that you put in and any money you're going to add to it, you tell the program when you're going to, start withdrawing from it. And when you withdraw, you put it back into tips, any withdrawals. And we simulate your spending, assuming all that money that's in the market's lost 100%. So we build you a safe living standard floor. And then because when you leave the casino and you take money out of the stock market, you're investing it safely. Now you can raise your floor for the rest of your life. You're not going to put it back in. So that's just showing you trajectories of your living standard that are upside, no downside. So what that's I think kind of connects to a lot of people's angst of they don't want to be out of the market, but they don't want to be in the market. They want to sleep at night and know that their basic living standard is going to be secure. And this is a way of basically, having some money in the game, but being safe in that respect.
Yeah, so a few things. I mean, I think one thing that, to me, one of the larger misconceptions, right, is that if you're using a binary outcomes metric, so succeed or fail, failure is not bankruptcy, right? Because almost every American has some amount of existing personal pension, whether it be Social Security, defined benefit, something. And so I think that one of my concerns when you could tell someone that they have a 0% chance of success, but they could be replacing 98% of their retirement income goal with income that is guaranteed for life. And so success rates almost by definition focus on the marginal role of savings when it comes to funding a goal, right? And so you could actually run scenarios where you make someone worse off from the perspective of success rates, but kind of radically improve almost all their outcomes. Or if they do happen to not accomplish their goal in its entirety, they accomplish, more of it and more often. So failure, if you view an outcome as either ones or zeros, isn't necessarily that bad based upon how bad you fail. I think that, what you just talked about though, is this key around if you do have a shortfall in your retirement income goal, based upon the level of the shortfall is how it could affect you, right? So if you just kind of decompose the retirement goal into essential and discretionary expenses, if I have to cut back on my discretionary expenses, I might be unhappy, but not crazy unhappy. If I can't pay my mortgage or whatever else, over healthcare, then I'm really, really unhappy. So I think there is this important notion of what do I have to have every year? And so, once that is covered, I think it can really change how you invest the rest of your portfolio. Now, at the same time, I think what we have to recognize is that most of us don't even model what failure means for retirees, right? I would define true failure as being alive and being broke. So two things have to happen, right? If you look at how most stochastic or Monte Carlo tools work for financial planning, the only random variable is returns, right? So you could actually in real life, if you were to have them to pass away at age 80, then it doesn't matter if your portfolio didn't survive for the next 15, 20, or 30 years. And so if I think for better or for worse, people are living longer. And as they live longer, I guess that's for the better. And if you assume retirement lasts 30 or 35 years with certainty, I think that could lead to, under consuming. People will say, well, David, I want to ensure that my retirees accomplish their goal. But I would say that, it's a balance, right? If you want to retire successfully, save 50% of your pay forever, then I can guarantee you're going to have enough money. Well, but there's a cost there. So I think that what most Americans need, given your earlier comment around under savings, is an idea of this balance, right? And so it's telling them, hey, if you save this much, you'll get this much, and kind of help them better understand the trade-offs. And I think that a lot of the tools that exist that use success rates or kind of binary outcome metrics do result in effectively oversaving or underspending, because they're not kind of accurately capturing the magnitude of failure if it happens, and then what failure is when thinking about kind of the random nature of mortality.
So I'm with you 100%. I mean, the basic story in economics is that we get happiness from the acorns. It's not from eating the acorns, not from the pile of acorns, and not from how big it is. It's our wealth. But and you're right that the off the top expenses like your mortgage, your taxes, our software says, oh, you got to pay those. We're going to simulate with our Monte Carlo the full risk investing or the upside investing, your living standard of where that's discretionary spending per household member. It's not total spending. This is after you've met your off the top expenses along the trajectory. So you do get to see how much, whether you're going to get to eat steak or cat food, because it's about discretionary spending. That's what the picture is. And then I certainly agree with you that failure of your portfolio is not failure of your living standard, because you could have, maybe you've got a $30,000 a year Social Security benefit. You worked a lot, but you saved nothing, and you have $10 in wealth, and you put it all on, 23 red at the roulette wheel, and that's probably the optimal thing to do if you've got $10. If you got $1 million and 30,000, or you're 20 million bucks and 10,000, you want to be cautious because you could lose it all, obviously. Right. So but again, if you see that, so some people, because of Social Security, other pensions, because of maybe real estate income coming in, the way they're investing, they've got a much safer living standard. They get more of an income floor than somebody else who's much more dependent on the market. So paradoxically, economics says that if you're richer, if you have more wealth, you should actually be more conservative in your investments because you have no floor, you have no protection. Whereas if there's a guy named Moshe Malevsky. I don't know if you know Moshe. He's up in Canada. He's professor of economics. He wrote this book called "Are You a Stock or a Bond?" And it says, you got to think about. You want to be kind of thinking about all your resources, not just your portfolio of fungible assets. But if you're all of a sudden retiring and you have a big Social Security benefits, that's really in the form of a bond. Or if you keep working, your labor income, if you got a secure job like me, I'm a tenured professor, to me, that's like a bond. And so I already have a lot of bonds, so I can be more aggressive in terms of investing in stock to be fully diversified. So that's, part of kind of the prescription of economics of trying to be balanced over your lifetime, but taking into account these what seem to be non-financial assets, which are kind of implicitly financial assets, but they're kind of a different form. You wouldn't typically think of labor income as holding a bond, right? That would be.
Yeah, I've done a bunch of research on that. I have a fun paper that's called No Portfolio is an Island, right? So portfolios don't exist in isolation, right? Saving money is not fun for any entity or individual. We want to consume it today. And so I think what's important is to just acknowledge all the other stuff you've got when it comes to investing that portfolio. I think that, one problem, if I can use that word loosely, with a lot of financial planning tools is that they don't provide any context around the economic value of things like Social Security benefits. Social Security is a government bond linked to inflation that pays you as long as you're alive. For most American households, it's worth more than $1 million. I think providing context, for example, on the household economic balance sheet can help people make better decisions, right? Your earlier comment about there's this notion of how much risk you should take in your portfolio. Well, there's different dimensions of risk, right? There's risk capacity. Risk capacity thinks about risk in terms of how much risk should you take given what you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to accomplish it, right? Do you have a lot of guaranteed income? Are you overfunded? Are you overfunded? There's also risk preference, right? How do you feel about risk and how do you respond to risk? And I think that there are some interesting ways to think about how to invest assets. So, should someone be aggressive or conservative? Well, if let's say that you're overfunded to accomplish your goal, you've got tons of money. Okay. To me, the next question would be, Do you want to maximize certainty around accomplishing your goal, or do you have secondary goals that are important, like leaving bequests to your kids, right? If you have no secondary goals, if you have no bequests, well, then, you should lock in that certainty, right? But if you have kind of multiple competing goals, I want both certainty around my retirement goal, but I'd love to leave money to my kids. You actually might want to be invested very aggressively up to certain points. If you're like massively overfunded, you can keep rolling the dice to kind of keep getting more wealth. But then you would, if you cross certain thresholds, you would dial back immediately. So I think that in reality, like, people are pretty complex creatures with multiple goals, but I think you have to kind of look through the prism of risk capacity and preference and figuring out how to invest appropriately, versus a lot of risk tolerance questionnaires that just ask you, how would you respond if markets go down? That from my perspective is not the best way to think about the risk you should be taking across the entire life cycle.
Yeah, no, I agree that your horizon could go beyond your own lifetime to your children's, because, if you're really, it's one thing to say, I'm going to set aside this amount and put it in tips and, something inflation index bonds that are safe, and just, that's it. I'm going to give them that money. I'm going to give them the house if I'm rich enough so I can do that. But beyond that, they're on their own, versus I'm actually kind of jointly helping them maximize their welfare, their acorn life, as well as mine. And so we have to kind of think about this as a joint problem. When I talk to young people, and I tell them their best investment is to get their parents to make the right Social Security decisions to maximize their lifetime benefits.
Yeah.
Because if they don't, they're going to be on the hook for taking care of their parents, or they're going to get less in a bequest if their parents die early. So that's a strange idea. You talk to Generation Z or X or whatever, millennials, and they don't have much to invest. Well, I say, your parents' money is really your money. They may not like to hear that. And your money is actually their money. You may not like to hear that, but you actually are in the same boat, because if they're in trouble, you're going to have to bail them out and so forth. So make sure that they're doing the right thing, and make sure that you're doing the right thing. But I did want to get to this lifespan issue that you raised in passing a few minutes ago, about the fact that people don't, one of the biggest uncertainties that we face is longevity risk, that we could live to 100 or we could die. I'm 72. I have friends. I'm losing friends all the time. They're older than me, a bit older, but I can see that this act, does that. I'm living in this world where I'm expecting to never die, or certainly never to stop work. My retirement plan is to retire a year after I die. That's my current retirement plan, and I expect that to be late. But you do die, but my mom lived to 98, so you have people. There's that probability, and that's you don't want to be starving, and other costs can go up. But economics says, if you go back to, I don't know if you know this Menachem Yari article from 1965, that he's this Israeli economist. It's a brilliant article about life insurance and annuities, and it's called Uncertain Lifetimes. I hope he gets a Nobel Prize for this. It's just a gorgeous article, and it says that mathematically they're the same security. One is if you solve the problem and the result comes out with a negative value, you're buying life insurance. If it's a positive value, you're buying an annuity. So mathematically, it's the same thing. You're dealing with the lifespan uncertainty. But what you already said is you have to plan to live to your maximum age of life, because you might, just like you have to look at the catastrophic worst case scenario with your house burning down when it comes to buying homeowners insurance. With lifespan insurance, longevity insurance, you have to focus on the worst case. And if you're self-insuring, what that means is you look at the worst case, that's your planning horizon. You can't make it your life expectancy or 10 years later. You have to make it your maximum, whatever you think that is. But then if you're not really super risk averse, you'll take a gamble and have your acorn, you'll consciously plan to have your acorns consumption decline as you get older. as the probability of making it another year gets smaller and smaller, you'll plan to spend less on acorns. And of course, that coincides with people's capacity to consume declining. They don't have as big an appetite. They can't travel as much. On the other hand, medical costs go up. So it's risky business, of course, obviously. So what's your favorite financial planning tool at this point? Do you have one, or do you like to use a combination? Some planners do that.
So, I mean, I don't know that I have one. So I mean, I can build pretty complex models, right? So I don't know that I know enough about one to say that I love it. I think that too many that exist out there use simplistic outcomes metrics. They don't properly account for dynamic spending. And so, maybe I'm just too negative, but I think that there's going to be more and better coming that do things. I think, it's funny, you mentioned Social Security. I was going to mention that too. I think that, so I think a lot of the calculators out there aren't very good. And it's actually for the reason that you hit on, which is just that break-even age, that is a very myopic perspective on the range of outcomes, right? What I always say is that if your parent, if you delay claiming and your parents die at age 75, you get all their stuff. You're going to get, I don't know, everything that they save. So there's a nice little floor to that bad outcome. From my perspective, the worst outcome for a lot of people would be that mom and dad live to 105. And not only do they deplete all of their assets, they start depleting your assets, right? That to me, is the bad outcome. Yes, if you both pass away at age 73 and you delayed to 70, you did not maximize the wealth you'd pass along to your heirs. However, they're going to get some, right? So when you change the definition of the outcome from maximizing wealth to ensuring some kind of minimum threshold is achieved, all of a sudden, delayed claiming makes a lot more sense. And so I think that's, don't think of it in terms of the break-even age, but if you are reasonably wealthy, I think that by delaying as long as you possibly can, you are kind of helping ensure that if you live a really long time, you're going to have the most income that you could receive for life that would minimize the burden of you on your children. So I think that is kind of the perspective that's missing from a lot of these tools, because they just focus on break-even ages or wealth maximization. Well, target a minimum threshold. So I want to make sure that my kids get at least $1 million, whatever else it is. And then delay claiming all of a sudden makes a lot more sense when it's viewed more holistically.
Yeah, I agree 100%. We've had, we have this tool, Maxify Planner. I'll get you a copy. But then we also pulled out the Social Security code and made a tool called Maximize My Social Security. It's only $39 and we have a lot of planners, and a lot of them have said you need to include break-even analysis. And we've been having this argument with them, or some of them, for 20 years. Absolutely not. It's not. You have to plan your maximum age of life. You can't. Break-even analysis is going to lead you to think about your life expectancy relative to the break-even point, and you're not going to die on time. So you're only going to die once, and it could be at 100. Just you can't count on your house fire being the average cost or the average fire, right? It could be the worst case. So if you're a big insurance company like in Prudential, yes, you can play the averages. That's what actuarial analysis is all about. But if you're just one individual, you can't pull the risk. You're only going to die once unless you're in Groundhog Day somehow. So that's not valid at all. I agree 100% that that's not something one should consider. I guess the question is, one thing that also occurs to me in our discussion here is that there are so many different software programs that are doing some form of conventional planning. And it seems like every day somebody's coming out with another, great, best new thing and it's usually a very shiny object in terms of even more beautiful graphics, even better slide bars, even faster answers, and no real description of what's going on under the hood. And are you taking into account the fact that if you adjust your spending because whatever, are you taking into account the fact that there's this Medicare Part B tax that premium tax called the IRMA that is highly progressive, and that the top bracket is not indexed for inflation, and that Social Security brackets for the taxation under federal income taxation are not indexed for inflation? Are these things, these very important features, really being handled under the hood? Because if they're not, things can be, you can get a very bad answer just on those kinds of issues, but let alone everything else. But then the thing that strikes me about so many slightly different approaches coming out all the time is that there's no underlying core theory. Whereas in economics, the theory goes back 100 years and it's just been built on, but it's one basic framework. It's called expected utility maximization. And all the Nobel Prizes in finance have been won by economists. Everybody who's gotten the Nobel Prize in finance has a PhD in economics, not in finance, because finance really hasn't evolved as a separate field. It was always been a subfield of economics. So all the great work in finance was done by economists in the 50s and 60s, people like Paul Samuelson, Bob Merton, Markowitz, Harry Markowitz, Bill Sharp, Jim Tobin, but they're all building on Irving Fisher's work. It's all consumption smoothing. It all goes back to that squirrel. And now the squirrel's got risk. Maybe he's got, will some of those acorns go rotten? That's like, or did he choose these kinds of acorns that actually hold up better, but they're harder to get to? And how many of these should he get versus that? So it's one. And so we build our software to just try and stay true to all that 100 years of research and just say, it turns out it was very difficult. It took the company's been in business 30 years, so it took a long time to get everything working. And the lifetime balance sheet is the first thing you see when you run a program. So you did reference lifetime, that you can't spend more than you've got. And then a lot of the spending is off the top that you have to spend. And so what's left is your discretionary spending. Now you just want to smooth it. And that's kind of the conversation starts in that spot. So tell me, let's move off of this kind of individual issue to the whole financial planning industry. How do you see that evolving? Is it getting bigger? Is it getting smaller? Are you getting more credentials? I talked about more tools coming out, but do you see AI, chat, GBT taking over? So we just asked the question what we should do, and it's going to. I could certainly think of how that might happen. What's your feeling for it? Where's the industry going? Are fewer people taking advantage of planning, or more? How's the industry going?
I think I would say it's getting better, right? I think that when I first joined the industry 20-ish years ago, stockbroker was analogous with a financial advisor, right? That was like the assumed job. I think that we've seen a reduced focus collectively on investment management. I'm not saying investments aren't important, but it's one part of a plan towards individuals or teams providing more holistic financial planning services. We've seen a rise in professionalism. I think it wouldn't be a stretch to say that financial advisors are not as widely as esteemed as accountants or attorneys or other professions, given the lack of barriers to entry. But I think we've seen improvement there. I'm excited about the different ways that individuals can access advice. There are a lot of not so great free online tools. There's a lot of relatively low cost robo advisors. There's still the full comprehensive advisors. But to me, people need help. Right. Making smart decisions about finances isn't always easy. You can't always just Google it and get the right answers. So, I've been proud of the steps that our profession has taken, but I also acknowledge it's a long way to go. Right. Someone can call themselves a financial advisor and really only sell you insurance, while someone else who uses the exact same title could be a true fee-only holistic advisor with, designations and everything else. And so I think that, what concerns me more is kind of the the range of quality in the industry, but I am excited about, like the future and how the industry has evolved to, I think, better help people accomplish their goals versus just, for example, to my earlier statement, focusing on selecting a few stocks and not asking questions around insurance or savings or everything else.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've been, watching the industry pretty carefully for 30 years, not like you. But I do think that things are evolving and improving and getting closer to the economics approach, to tell you the truth.
Right.
I think it's a general, but here's the thing that, and since you're so influential in the industry, you might be able to make a difference. I don't think any of the CFP courses or any of the CFA courses, the RIA programs that spend even 10 minutes teaching the economics approach to financial planning, which is different. There's a body of theory. It doesn't have to be highly mathematical to teach it to someone. I could teach it to a high school student, to tell you the truth, and I'd be happy to work with you to develop. But they don't, you've got a 13-week CFP program, even taught at Boston University, where we have, I've been for my entire career, basically. And I tried 15 years ago to say, look, this needs to include economics-based financial planning. And we even have a software tool. We'll give it away for free to no interest. And then, but now there seems to be now we're starting to have some discussions and there seems to be some interest. So if we could have just 10% of the course, 15% based on this, a lot of, we've got 20,000 economists. This is a well-established, mature field. So, highly mathematical formulations of finance, but also very simple things. But it's basically all the same, but it's not being taught. And on the other hand, we're not teaching conventional planning in economics finance programs, either in economics departments or business schools. Nobody's teaching set a target, keep your saving on autopilot, keep your spending on autopilot, figure out the probability of success or failure. Nobody teaches that because, frankly, we don't think it's kosher, that it doesn't pass the sniff test for we economists. So I think there's this big disconnect that we have to get the planning world to learn some economics on the financial economics in a kind of a formal way. That I think would be a good thing. Obviously, so I'm biased. I'm not saying, hey, there's this approach or that approach. I'm saying I think economics is the right approach, that the industry is coming over to the economics approach, but it could come over quicker if there was actual training. Anyway, your reaction.
Well, I think we are seeing that in other designations and programs. So there's some that I'm involved with the American College that do provide some of that kind of more economics-based framework around how to help people make better decisions. But to your point, the CFP curriculum is I mean, it's been a while. That was 20 years ago for me. It is definitely more kind of like practitioner focused, like implementing and like selecting life insurance and investments. But I think providing advisors with more of the kind of the theoretical foundation around household economics, I think could hopefully help them make better decisions and have a different framework that they can use to think about just the efficacy of all these different decisions, right? I mean, I think that, yes, you need to know the different types of homeowners policies and what an investment is, but like structurally, it all ties together to a plan. Like, why are you buying insurance? Why are you investing in risky assets? It all goes up to this kind of basic foundation that, to your point, I'm not convinced that advisors are taught in these courses because they're not necessarily focused on providing that foundation.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we agreed on everything.
That's good, right?
There was a kind of a tough-nosed Texan when I came to BU as president. His name was John Silver. He was basically getting into arguments with everybody. He was just very feisty. And so one day I'm having a meeting with him and starting to leave. He says, "Very good meeting. One problem." I said, "What's that, John?" He said, "I'm at the door." He said, "We didn't have an argument." And he was pissed. And so I said, and of course we hadn't had an argument. So what I did is I opened the door and screamed, what the hell do you mean we didn't have an argument? And I slammed the door as far as I could, just so he could feel better.
That's good. I like that. I like that.
Yeah, we didn't have an argument today, and it's been a pleasure talking with you. And I think it's going to be a great podcast. We'll have it up in probably next week and get you a copy. And thanks so much. And let's stay in touch.
Thank you. Yeah.
See you.